Hello and welcome. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are joining us from. So, a CRM expert, an agency, and a travel marketing company all get on a webinar together to talk about the cookieless world. What happens next? We all get to learn a lot. Not my finest joke, but this is no laughing matter today. The third-party cookie is going away, and we've got to start taking those steps now to ensure that we're all successful. I'm Christy Job, and I'm a marketing manager here at Sojern, and I am thrilled to welcome you all to part 5 of our 5-part webinar series that we've been planning since last year, mind you, which means I can finally stop baking up all these cookie puns, and by now you should also feel really confident that we can help you transition to that new digital advertising world in 2022. So thank you all so much for coming along on our cookieless world ride. On our first stop, we broke it down to the basic ingredients, what are cookies and pixels, why they're going away, and why it can be a win in the end. Then we laid out all of our solutions for the cookieless world. In part 3, we went deep on Sojern solutions for new ways to retarget. We focused a ton in CRM data, which is a big reason why we've got Dan on this call today to help us unpack how to get that first-party data cleaned up. In our 4th webinar, you might remember Kurt, he's back again today. He unpacked 10 tips to prepare for the cookieless world and what steps you can take now. And that brings us to part 5. So if you've missed any of those, they do live on our website. And the only thing on our agenda today, a conversation on cookieless, is to answer those questions straight from you. So we've gotten hundreds of questions throughout the series, and we did our best to package them into a nice little recipe that flowed into a similar order of how we talked through the 10 tips a couple weeks ago. We will still take live questions as we can get to them as well. So in our 10 tips webinar, we talked through collecting data, like getting the consent to do so and incentivizing people to log in on your website. We walk through getting your data house in order by ensuring it's being smoothly funneled into a CRM or whatever database you choose to use. And of course, sharing that historical booking data. And finally, activating that data through a multi-channel and full funnel approach by focusing on upper funnel expansion and diversifying the channels that you're running campaigns on, which is why Lindley is going to be awesome today. She's our agency expert and knows a thing or two about that. So again, the focus on these topics is why we've brought these experts on today, and they'll each have a really awesome, unique perspective to help get everybody started. Okay, with that, over to our experts. So we are all over the map today. We've got California, Utah, and Texas on the line, and I'm sure we're all really excited to get out and travel again. I know I am. So along with a bit of background on yourselves and your company, tell us the first place you are dying to travel to, and I will kick it off. So I know it's a stretch considering we're almost to the second half of the year, but my bucket list is London. And fortunately for me, we do have an office there, so it might not be out of the question. First up, I'm going to kick it over to Kurt to learn a bit about Sojern and what you do in the travel space.
Great. Thanks, Christy. And thanks for hosting all these. Wow. It's great to be here, and it's great also not to be just us. It's nice to have a good crew with Dan and Lindley today. I'm Kurt Weinsheimer. I run the solutions team here at Sojern, which includes product marketing, engineering, data science, and insights. So our team really is always focusing on how do we solve the problems for marketers to help them better engage, attract, and convert travelers online. And that's really what Sojern does. So our focus is to empower travel marketers to understand customer demand, traveler demand, figure out the best way to engage with those travelers across multiple channels, and then convert them and turn them into loyal customers. So happy to be here today. And where would I rather be? Okay, so fingers crossed, my family's going to Greece this summer. So we are, we're getting our vaccine passports in line, and planning to get there. So that's the bucket list that we're going after this year.
Are you booked up? Are you pretty confident it's happening?
We are booked up and ready to go. So confident? Yes, of course, 100%, maybe.
That's awesome. Love it. All right, Lindley, let's hear a little bit about you and GCommerce.
Sure. So I'm Lindley Cotton. I am the president of GCommerce. We are based in Park City, Utah, and we are a hospitality focused, full service marketing agency. We've been in business for over 20 years, and we provide anything from website design and development to search engine marketing, optimization, social media advertising, display and programmatic. Really anything digital that your property needs, we cover. And let's see here, I am looking forward to this summer heading back to the East Coast, actually, to Martha's Vineyard. My family has a summer home there, and it's truly the best place on the planet for me. It's where I go to recharge and regroup for the next year ahead. So that's what I'm looking forward to this summer.
Well, given that you just mentioned you strongly dislike winter and you just got snow out in Park City, I think you're looking forward to that. All right, Dan, let's hear about Revinate and you.
Yeah, hi. Good to be here. I'm Dan Hang, President and CEO of Revinate. Revinate's really a guest data platform for the hospitality space. And so really, we built out a number of different services over the years in guest feedback space, in marketing and CRM. But really a lot of what our focus is around allowing hotels to harness the power of their data and use that to drive direct revenue. So that's really kind of our focus, which I think will become clear here today. And in terms of travel, I'm jealous of Greece. I had an Italy trip that was canceled due to COVID. I haven't rebooked that one yet. So I would say the near term thing that I'm most excited about is I am going back to Vermont, which is where I grew up, and I'll be there for the 4th of July, and super excited to get back on a plane and get out there.
Awesome, love it. Thank you all so much. We got the travel dreaming going for our listeners, I assume. So as one quick reminder, we will still try to take as many live questions as possible, so get them sent over, and if we do not catch them today, we will definitely follow up with you directly afterwards. So with that said, we're really looking forward to just hearing perspectives. So go off on those awesome tangents, interrupt me anytime, share additional info. We are just all ears for your expertise. And I do want to note that it looks like the first few questions are pretty data specific. So I'll kick the first few of those off with our CRM expert, Dan, and then we'll round out the second half hearing a bit more from Lindley, and of course get perspectives from both and our fantastic Kurt on all of these questions. So with that, I will dive right in. So the first question, if you've been watching our series, we've touched on most of these pieces throughout the different webinars, but let's just put a bow on it and tackle it all in one fell swoop. So how important are hashed emails, first-party cookies, and other traveler/CRM data assets for marketing in the cookieless world? So Dan, what are your thoughts on that?
Sure. So all of that there's quite a bit in there, but it's quite important. I guess I'll start with email. Email is extremely important. I mean, I think that's going to be your universal identifier or digital passport, as I think Kurt was referring to it earlier. And so that's really what you're trying to achieve. One of the challenges that we see with a lot of hotels is they'll tend to get actually multiple email addresses even for the same guests. So you might get a business email, you might get a personal email, and then a lot of times actually if the guest books on an OTA like booking.com, you'll actually get a bogus kind of like temporary email address. And so one of the things we help our customers with a lot is to actually help clean all that up so that you can kind of merge and dedupe and try to figure out, okay, who is this real person? What is, and break it all down to the right rich guest profile, because you may, for many of your guests, have 2 or 3 different email addresses for that person. But then what you do want to kind of boil that down and figure out what's the primary email address. And then yes, as described in kind of previous webinars, you want to hash that email, be able to match it up with your first party data, your CRM, and be able to kind of understand as much as you possibly can about that guest, and then use that for targeting or activation on other channels.
So I think one of the questions that people may have is what is the easiest way to determine what that primary email is?
Yeah, that's a good question, and it's a little bit tricky. I would say, in some cases, you can tell that there's some patterns to the OTA emails, and so if you get something from Booking.com, et cetera, you want to be able to you capture that in your PMS, but you do want to kind of have some rules in place, which we've built into our system to kind of understand, okay, this is not an email address that's actually going to be usable. The other stuff is a little bit more subtle, like business versus work, and it's just business versus personal, and you may need to kind of take a cue from the guest in terms of which one they're using more frequently. And in general, you don't want to throw away data. So a lot of our approach is to kind of try to merge into a single profile, but you actually keep track of multiple of those because those may end up being helpful as you try to match and kind of connect all of the dots on what's the data you have. Otherwise, you can end up in a situation, I think, in earlier webinars, we also talked about how it's hard to do this people-based marketing when you have multiple devices. And so it's the same kind of thing of like, you might be thinking you're getting the same person, but if they have multiple email addresses and you're targeting both of those, it's kind of the same problem.
Yeah, that's people-based marketing is obviously the way of the future. So that's super helpful. Lindley, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so I mean, for years I've been told by people, oh, email is really a dead channel for marketing. And I love that out of all of this, email's really going to have its heyday again. So, it's just incredibly important to be focused on that first party data, both in first party cookies and as email addresses, because you can really leverage that information and that data across all your different media types as well. So, be sure to be capturing those email addresses and then integrating that into your paid search campaigns, your social media campaigns, because again, in the past, the third-party cookie really kind of took the heat of all of that work and did all the heavy lifting, which is no longer going to be the case.
Yeah, that's right. And also I think it's important that you've got, and Lindley, you kind of touched on this, you've got email really important. The first party cookie also really important because that's going to drive a lot of the personalization that you're able to do on the site. It's also going to allow you to enrich the profiles that you have because you want to know what is the activity of a user on that site. And when we talk about measurement, being able to measure is going to be critically important. What's the activity that those users are doing? First party cookies play a really important role there. And then we've also talked about, historical booking data. So, CRM data from your PMS, even from the GDS can be really powerful and important because when you think about cookies and emails, a lot of that we're talking about is your is what's happening on your site. But direct bookings on your site are only a small percentage of the whole user experience. So getting that historical booking data is critically important because it allows you to maybe move someone that booked on an OTA, move them to your direct channel. Somebody that booked offline, get them to book online with you. So historical booking data is going to be critical across the board too. So you really need to think about kind of all three of those buckets as key ingredients going forward.
That's great. So we know that this CRM data is going to be really important going forward. So as a hospitality or travel brand, what do they need to know about requesting, storing, and sharing that CRM data with partners for activation? Dan, I'll kick it to you first.
Sure. So you're definitely going to want to collect the data, as we've been kind of hammering on. It's pretty important to capture the email address whenever you possibly can. And I think doing that in the online channels is kind of fairly obvious. If you want to kind of collect that if they book online or wherever else they might book. In worst case scenario, though, everybody comes through your front desk and you want to train your staff to collect that information too if you don't have it. And make sure, I guess another part of that though is to make sure you get consent. So you want to make sure that they understand what's going to be happening with their email address. And it can unfortunately be a little bit tricky to sort out depending on like where you are. There are lots of different regulations around that. We won't get into all of that here, but you do need to kind of be aware of that and make sure that your guests do know what they're signing up for when they provide that information. And you want to give them generally some type of an incentive for, hey, why should I give you my info? Why should I trust you with that? So that's super important. I think when it comes to kind of sharing that with partners, you want to kind of look at a couple different things. One is if you're passing information out to partners, you want to be super careful. There's this concept of PII or personally identifiable information. You don't want to send a lot of that out or any of that out into the world without being super careful. And so this is where emails becoming hashed emails is actually an important thing. So you're not sending all of your guests' emails out into the wild. You're using hashed emails when you communicate with different partners and are able to pass that data. So it's done so in a much more secure way. I think the other thing that we would recommend is you want to just look at who are your vendors and where are you passing that data, and just kind of do some due diligence on that. Of are they SOC 2 compliant? As an example, do they take security of your data very, very seriously? And how are they going to handle all of that? And also, are they a cloud-based vendor? I think the cloud's been around for years. I think early days people were concerned about it. I think most recently people are starting to recognize, generally cloud-based solutions are more secure than if you got an on-premise system that anybody could log into or just stick a USB stick into on site. That's a little bit more scary. And so I think if you're looking at kind of top-notch cloud-based vendors, that's kind of where you generally want to go.
I thought one of the things that you had mentioned before that I thought was really interesting that I haven't heard in any of our series yet is not only incentivizing the guests to give their email, but incentivizing your front desk. You're at attraction, they're taking those tickets to get the email too. If they're some type of incentivization program within the business, they're more excited about collecting those emails. So
yeah, you bet. A lot of the groups that we work with tend to look at the data, and they can kind of even have a little bit of like a fun competition within like a hotel group to say, hey, who's doing the best job and why? So they may tie compensation to it, or they may just kind of have a friendly competition on it. But it's definitely something that what gets measured gets done. And so if you're looking at it, then it's going to make a difference.
Yeah,
I thought that was a great idea. Well,
I think what Dan said about kind of understanding where your partners are on this is really important. So there are some kind of litmus tests you should be doing, right? So first of all, it's important that how are you hashing, right? Well, if they kind of look at you and go, can you elaborate? Like find someone new, right? And it's important to note because one of the things is, and also when you talk about GDPR compliance or understanding regulations, those are important kind of basic questions to be asking your partners to make sure that they understand the situation. Also, I think that when we're talking about things like hashing, it's important to note that most partners like Sojern, they're actually going to be hashing the email before they even get that data. So the hashing is happening in real time. So most partners, the way that they set it up, if they're doing it right, they're never getting that PII in the first place, right? So the email is coming, getting hashed, and then getting absorbed into that partner's database to build audiences and activate it, et cetera. So that's another really important thing to note, is that you want to think about, you want to ask how they're planning to hash and what they're planning to do about that.
So, and I think you both touched on this just a bit, but permission is obviously going to be more important than ever. We're doing all of this because we're trying to protect the privacy of consumers. So now when we talk about emails, that becomes even more crucial. So how can travel companies create that login experience, get the permission? What do they need to consider to do all of that, especially for some of our smaller hotels and attractions? This is a big change. So what do they need to consider to do that? Dan, I'll kick that over to you first.
Sure. I mean, I think you can look to retail for inspiration. I think that the retail space is maybe a little bit ahead of us here, and you kind of see lots of just best practices around. Hey, you're going to get some type of deal. Free shipping is maybe not as applicable in our industry, but certainly discounts are. And so kind of the promise of a discount for joining their program or joining their mailing list, et cetera. We have a lot of folks who kind of like will just have like a contact list that they'll start building well before somebody actually books. They just kind of want to have people who are somewhat interested, and even actually collecting information from people who are like visiting the restaurant or visiting other amenities within the property. They may be able to add those in instead of just using, hey, these are past guests and it's data from the PMS. So whatever they can do to kind of get more data there. And again, always remember, like, online is kind of the obvious one. But a lot of people forget offline as well, and so thinking about like when you're engaging offline with those guests, how can you capture information there too?
Sure, love to get an agency perspective from you too, Lindley, and what you're recommending to some of your clients.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I think we've all really been watching the OTAs, and a lot of the brands jump on creating these member-only rate programs, which only require an email address. And I think loyalty programs are going to become more and more popular just across all hospitality brands here pretty soon. But the thing that I would recommend everyone to remember is that in order for someone to give you their information, you really need to make it compelling and oftentimes take that first step and give them something first. I always say, you know, you got to give a little to get a little. And don't be afraid to get creative with database capture tools. You know, sure, a basic form on your website might get the job done, but as everyone really starts to double down on capturing emails on their websites in the next 12 to 18 months, you're going to want to try to find a way to stand out from the crowd. So try to make it interesting and challenge your technology partners on how they can integrate with one another so that the user has a more meaningful experience once they're logged in to this new login experience. You know, if they just log in and there's nothing there, then that doesn't leave, you know, a super exciting feel about your brand either. So just try to make it interesting and make it useful to the user.
Yeah, I think these guys touched on the fact that, you know, either incentivize by giving them something great or make their lives easier. You know, personalization is a critical part of this. So I think both those things are really important. And also remember, be overt about this. You know, this is something that first of all, when people are saying, geez, you know, you have to get permission for third-party cookies, that's on every website. You just look, hey, we need permission to use, and you just click accept and you kind of move forward. In the same way that I think it's going to become just much more normal. And by the way, it already is in a lot of digital media, retail, et cetera. So people are comfortable if you just engage with them honestly, openly, and you give them a reason. So, you know, if you think, oh, I'll do this kind of, you know, under the covers, like bad call. You're trying to create permission to engage with your customers going forward. So it's really important to do it in an open, respectful, and incentivized manner.
Sure. Kurt, I think this is going to be a good question for you because, you know, this is something we've gone over in the webinars thus far, but a big concern that I know that we've heard from our customers too. So how can brands target potential travelers who are either not logged in or who you don't have that hashed email info on when third-party cookies do sunset?
Yeah. Right. This is obviously the big question is, okay, that's great if I get someone's email and they're logged in, but, you know, alert, most of my customers don't and aren't, and people don't necessarily come to travel sites that often. And so I think it's important to note that there are kind of three main ways when you think about digital marketing that you can be targeting users. So one is addressable, and that's really what we've been talking the most about. That's when you know the user in either in a direct relationship that you've created through their email or their phone number. So you're texting or emailing them. That's kind of direct addressable. Or you're using pseudo-anonymized data, as we've talked about, to build audiences and target those users in a privacy compliant and permission-based way. And that's really where you've got that data. And that's being kind of enriched through ML. And that will be driven also by audiences and partners that have a lot of data. So if you think about players like Amazon have massive amounts of customer data, and they've got permission to market to those users on your behalf. So you'll see expansion with UID 2.0 is another example where there's going to be expansion of those addressable channels to be able to target more users. The second area is contextual targeting. So think about this, there's context around the targeting. So it's either relevant content, someone's at a travel site, or they're at, you know, Visit Florida, destination site. So you know kind of why they're there. You don't need to know who that user is to target that user if you say, okay, sounds like they want to go on a beach vacation. So if you have context around that, that will be an important channel that you can use without having logged in data. Then the other key part of contextual is if somebody's searching for your hotel or your destination through search or meta search, you can target those users. And you need to target those users. It's a critical part of brand defense. And that's really the bread and butter for the OTAs and meta search sites. So contextual is going to be critically important. And then the last is kind of, you'll hear people talking about cohorts or kind of an ID-free world where you may not know the individual user that you're targeting like you do an addressable, but you've players like a Google or potentially Trade Desk or other partners that will build cohorts of groups of users that have similar wants, needs, or interests, and you can target those users to attract them. So there will be lots of ways beyond addressable that become much more important. That that historically were really important, right? For targeting content, that was like the way Yahoo built their business. Now it's all coming back again. So what's old is new again.
Kind of just like what Lindley mentioned earlier, emails getting heyday again. Yep. Like bringing back, really.
Yeah, and even the contextual targeting that Kurt was referencing, I mean, those are tactics and targeting methodologies that have been around forever. And again, they're just being resurfaced, and it's kind of like, don't be afraid to go with the tried and true, because those technologies still exist, and they're still, as long as you have the strategy behind it in terms of what the messaging is and who you're trying to reach, it's still going to work quite well.
Great, and I think this question leads in really well because Kurt, you just alluded to this, two of our favorite channels at Sojern. So SEM and meta search, like you said, are going to be really important channels in a cookieless world. So I'm going to kick this to Lindley because I know you deal with this on a daily basis. Why are these going to be so important?
Sure. So search engine marketing and meta search are both part of a comprehensive full funnel direct booking strategy. So, and that's really essential as we try to gain more first party data. Search engine marketing also provides you with keyword targeting options, obviously, as well as strong audiences from Google, allowing you to continue targeting and sending qualified traffic to your website. Both of these channels also show a level of intent, which I know is another concern for a lot of people. That obviously helps build additional qualifying traffic. And Google has been continuing to roll out, additional ML ways to improve your bid strategies, and that really helps narrow in your audience that's most likely to convert. Ultimately, both of them, meta search and search engine marketing, are going to provide you a way to capture bottom of the funnel traffic, which will end in more direct bookings for you.
100%. That's our strategy at Sojern too. Dan, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think the main, Lindley's more the expert there than me, but I guess I would say, the more you're going to drive, like even if the user doesn't convert on, like obviously SEM super important because you want to get people to your website, and so it's more important than ever to get people to the website, generate first party cookie data, and try to get them to register whatever means you can. And so SEM is a great way to do that, as an example.
100%. So, Kurt, something to add there?
Well, and then finally, I think that we've got to remember, these are critical channels that the OTAs and meta search sites are using themselves. So you've got to get in there from a brand defense standpoint. And this is an area that, we've been using ML aggressively to improve, bidding, targeting, et cetera. So this is an area that's also going to accelerate in complexity, but also in performance. So it's something that's going to be critical moving forward.
Speaking of performance, and I think another big concern with all these changes, will campaign performance metrics and reporting change, do you anticipate, in the cookieless world? Lindley, I'll send that to you first.
Sure. So bottom line, revenue is always going to be our true north when it comes to evaluating marketing campaigns and performance. But there's going to be some new metrics that are going to challenge our way of thinking about performance. For example, Google Analytics 4 was officially released a few months ago, or out of beta, and the emphasis that GA4 demonstrates is really around engagement. The number of website sessions is no longer really an indicator of success or lack thereof. It's about what did users do while they were on your site? Did they engage with your blog? Did they submit any forms? Things like that. And it's clear that Google is pushing us all to really think about quality over quantity. And you're also going to start to see platforms like Facebook and Google using machine learning to fill in the gaps on conversion data as more privacy measures are put in place. Metrics like estimated conversions are going to become normalized when we can't see all of that data due to privacy regulations. So there's going to be some new metrics that come into the fold, but again, mainly everyone should still keep an eye towards what is it doing from a revenue standpoint.
I think we can all agree revenue is very important for business. Dan, anything that you've been talking to your clients about?
Yeah, I mean, a couple quick things I'd add. So one is there may be an advantage in that you may be able to have slightly stronger revenue attribution than you used to have in a world where if the guest is booking and you do a good job of kind of unifying all your data into a data platform, you may be able to see, okay, this is what came from the PMS and this is who I was marketing to. And so like it's always a little bit tricky. Revenue attribution is a really tricky business, but you may end up having better attribution in some cases, so that's kind of a positive. But I guess I would agree generally with Lindley of like, eye on the prize. It's all about revenue. I mean, in the email world, we tend to have people focus on open rates and click-through rates, and those types of things are important to kind of understand on a campaign by campaign basis. Is this good and is this resonating? But don't lose track of revenue. I mean, that's what you're trying to drive, direct revenue.
Agreed.
Yeah, and I think when we look at the different tactics that you're using, that's going to also influence kind of what you're able to use from a reporting and measurement standpoint. So when you think about addressable, your total numbers may decrease, but your accuracy is going to go way up. So it's actually going to become a much more efficient channel and one that you're going to be able to track all the way down to the conversion. So you'll actually get potentially better or clear reporting and efficiency, but you aren't necessarily going to have the scale. So, and the same thing is going to be on your channels like SEM and meta search. You will be able to track things all the way down to the conversion. But again, neither of those necessarily have the scale that you need. So it's when you get to larger scale, upper funnel activities that, to Lindley's point, you're going to have to change your performance expectations. The way that we're thinking about it is you almost need to break it into driving direct demand and then driving direct conversions. And so when you're driving direct demand, it will be more about engagement. And so when you think about things like display, video, CTV, today with a lot of display, you can measure that all the way down to the conversion with retargeting, things of that sort. Now you're going to have to look at that and say, how's that performing as far as driving people to my site, are those customers engaged customers? I may or may not know that they actually converted or not in that session, but I'm going to learn more about them. So your demand channels, your upper funnel demand channels, you're going to use maybe slightly different measurement, but it actually could be more accurate about how it's helping you out. And then on your conversion channels like meta search and search, and those where you've got logged in audience experience, there you can kind of track down to the conversion level. So it's going to take some openness to change on the measurement side, which is a critical part of marketing today. I think it's also important to note that this is already happening. So people like Google, Facebook, they're modeling conversions already, and marketers, whether they know it or not, are giving credit and taking credit for modeled conversions in things like search, in a lot of the conversions that you see on Facebook, through Instagram or stories, etc. So it's not actually super new. It just becomes more prevalent as we move forward.
think that's a good segue into this next question. You mentioned, Facebook and Google are already doing this. We know they're very powerful in the space already. They're the walled gardens, if you will. Is this shift going to give more power to them? Especially, I think that's a concern for, your smaller to mid-sized businesses out there that, want to keep driving revenue. And I will send that to, who's the lucky winner? Dan, what do you think?
Sure. Yeah, I think the big guys keep getting bigger. I think that if you look at, it's become I think the shift of third-party cookies makes it a lot harder to target people unless they're logged in. But the flip side of that is, if you look at, Facebook, you're pretty much always logged in. A lot of Google properties, you're mostly logged in. Things like YouTube, and so they own a lot of the logged in minutes. I think there was great stuff on that in one of the earlier webinars about how much time people are spending on that, and also like on Hulu. And so people are logged in, and Facebook and Google own a lot of that time. And so I think that it's going to be logical for people to say, okay, I know I have my hashed emails. I know who I want to target. Let's go get them. And it's going to be easier to do that there than it is. I think, unfortunately, the losers will end up being kind of like smaller third-party sites. They have more trouble monetizing from a publishing standpoint, but more of your ad dollars as a hotel may end up going to Facebook and Google because they can effectively target your guests.
I think you mentioned that the logged in environments, and when I looked at that stat initially, we did a really good breakdown of it. I said, there's no way that's true. And then I started to get the notifications for how much screen time I was having each week, and I was terrified. And I said, okay, that really does add up. So you raised a really good point. People they already are spending a ton of time in those authenticated environments. So Lindy, anything that you would share from an agency perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I really just kind of echo what Dan was saying. I mean, these walled gardens have the most valuable and broadest wealth of information and ability for marketers to leverage that and reach their audiences. So it is going to, this transition is going to make our reliance on these ad tech providers a little bit deeper, for sure. Although I don't know that it's going to change a whole lot in terms of how marketers are, looking at these types of platforms. But for sure, they are sort of enriching and doubling down on their importance to a marketer, and making it so that we really have to rely on Google's new technology, Flock and Fledge, and making sure that marketers know all the ins and outs of that.
Anything from a Sojern perspective, Kurt, that you would share?
Yeah, I mean, I think definitely, Google, Facebook continue to be powerful. I think the other two A's are going to become more powerful. Amazon is coming on very quickly. They've got a massive logged in user group with Prime. I don't know how many of us are on this call, have Prime, but I remember being back in the day when we could be live at conferences. I asked a room, how many people have a hotel loyalty, measure, and this was at a travel conference, and probably half or more raised their hand, and they asked how many people had a Prime account, and it was basically everybody in the room. So that they're going to be, I think, more powerful, as will Apple, because they're going to be determining what data you can and can't target against. Now, on the flip side, I think that makes it even more important you're taking a multi-channel approach, because you don't want to become too dependent on any one partner, because it's also going to limit your reach, because they are not engaging across channels with each other. So you really need to be thinking about, what is my multi-channel strategy? And then the other thing to remember is there will be, what we call the open web. And we partner with players like the Trade Desk, Xandr, that are very focused on making sure that you can still engage with customers across the web outside of these big walled gardens. And that's going to be super important. And that's where you're going to see capabilities like UID 2.0. Hashed email is one of those capabilities you can use across the open web. And so it's also going to be important that you're partnering with people that can work across multiple DSPs, from a demand side platforms, from a marketing standpoint. That's how you get to customers on ESPN, CNN, NewYorkTimes.com, et cetera. That's the open web, which is still really, really powerful. And the name you're going to hear again is Yahoo. Yahoo is back. Verizon just sold Yahoo and AOL as a combined business, and they have a very powerful DSP that will be using all the customers that are in that Yahoo AOL ecosystem. So that'll be another area. But the key here is that it's going to be multi-channel in order to balance across the different power channels.
100%. I think one thing that we haven't touched a ton on yet a bit, but machine learning, obviously Sojern, we're very passionate about that. It's part of our bread and butter. So what role do we see that data and machine learning playing in this transition, and we think that'll evolve in the next 3 to 5 years? And I think that's probably a great question for Dan to kick off.
Sure. So super bullish on machine learning. I mean, I think fundamentally you need to have a bunch of data. So, as a general theme, you got to collect data, or you don't have as much to kind of throw into a model. But so the more data you can get, the more high quality you can get that data. That's important. We've invested pretty heavily in machine learning. A lot of that is even just for helping solve that first problem I was talking about, of taking a bunch of your booking data and trying to get it into rich guest profiles. And so that's kind of like maybe first step of like leverage machine learning just to figure out what that rich guest profile is and better understand your guests. I think the other opportunities for machine learning kind of follow all the way through after that, of saying, okay, now I've got my database, I want to segment it correctly, I want to figure out what types of campaigns, I want to figure out who I should send what message to and when and on what channel. And so really all of that, I think, is ripe for innovation in machine learning, basically saying, hey, there's a lot of data out there. How can I figure out how to best activate my guest data to drive revenue? And so I think kind of like all the way through that funnel, there's kind of opportunity for that. And the winners are definitely going to be going in that direction, because it's too much data to crunch on your own.
What about from an agency perspective, Lindley?
Yeah, so machine learning is going to continue to provide us with the ability to really fill in the gaps where conversion tracking is lost, due to the removal of the third-party cookie. As I mentioned earlier, we're going to start seeing metrics like estimated conversions, especially on your upper funnel campaigns, and it's going to provide an enhanced optimization opportunity for marketers to target based on those users who are most likely to convert. So it's not, and then before we even get to the conversion level, also really allowing you to personalize your marketing efforts on a scale, so that it's easier for you to do so at a much larger scale.
Yeah, I think personalization was a huge part of the conversation right before COVID came, and it'll be a huge piece of the conversation in cookieless world. Kurt, any thoughts from our perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I think ML and AI in general is critical. Data will still be kind of the main ingredient that you're going to be using, and it's what type of data that you have access to is what's going to be changing. But then you've got to use ML to drive personalization, targeting, and measurement. And so today, we're using ML kind of all across the path of that advertising kind of marketing journey. So when you're ingesting and creating audiences, you're scoring those users, you're determining who you think would be right to target for what customers. Machine learning is taking advantage of that to build those audiences. And then when you decide when to target, how to target, that's all using automated optimization. Machine learning is helping inform that that targeting, those bid strategies, et cetera. And then the results come out, and that information then gets funneled back in to determine what audiences are the right audiences. And it's this powerful cycle that is really controlled and driven by ML. And back in the day, you used to do A/B testing. you'd test this, and then you'd test that, and you'd get the results after a week. And then you'd make a change, and then now automation is allowing that to happen literally multiple times, an hour, a day, a week, etc. It's continuous learning that's happening that speeds the power of performance, and it speeds innovation. And so it's going to be just kind of it is a critical part of what we do today, and it'll continue to be really effective. And the positive thing is it's going to help everybody in targeting and marketing, more efficiently and more effectively, both from the start of the audience all the way through to measurement.
That's great, very helpful. I think we're gonna have time for hopefully 2 more questions, but for sure this one. And I think given that we know this change is coming in 2022, people are just trying to start ramping up business again. When should they start talking to their marketing, booking, and CRM partners, and what questions should they be asking to get the discussions going for this transition? I'll send that to Lindley first, because I am certain that you're getting questions like this all the time.
Yes, every day. So yes, really as soon as possible. And it's not that it takes a huge lift, to get going. It's just more about thinking through, what data do you have now, and how clean is that data, and how do you start to develop strategies on activating against the data so that it works harder for you, since we won't be able to rely on those third-party cookies. And even retargeting campaigns as we know them today are going away, and there's a lot of reliance in our industry on those retargeting campaigns. So it's important to have a full understanding of what you have now, so we can create that plan and start to build up your first party data if in fact you do struggle with capturing email addresses on property, or you don't have a strong web presence in terms of capturing email addresses there. It's not a huge lift in terms of the manpower to get this up and running, but it does take some forethought and some strategy around your brand and how to deploy these types of things.
It's great advice. Dan, what have you been talking to people about on your end?
Yeah, I mean, I think part of what we've seen is, some of the more forward-thinking hotels actually used some of this downtime and the unfortunate, obviously the tragic situation we've been in with the pandemic, of kind of saying, hey, actually, I actually might need to make some swaps in my tech stack, and so now actually might be a good time to do that. While occupancy is a little bit down from where it normally might be. I think it gives you a little bit of time to kind of think through your overall strategy. I think Lindley's right. You may be able to take some small steps, and in some ways it's not super hard to get started. In other ways, you may, by taking a step back, say, hey, there is something major in this equation that I need to swap out. I'm working with a vendor that doesn't actually work, and you might need to do something more drastic. And frankly, now might be a good time to do that as well.
Mm-hmm.
Anything you'd like to add, Kurt?
Yeah, I mean, just to first reiterate what Lindley was saying, which is top partners are already starting to push on this. They're already starting to collect and share hashed emails with us, first party cookie data, and they're doing this because third party cookies, by the way, are still the bread and butter. So you're still using this. But now is when you want to get that hashed email first party data activated, right? And second of all, to Lindley's point, this is easy. This is like a 30-minute lift to start getting to share hashed email and first party cookie. So A, it's easy, and B, this is the time that you want to do it. Now, timing is important from a conversion data, historical booking data, et cetera. That takes more time and energy, right? You've got to look at, understand your databases and things of that sort. So you have to get on that because you want to do it now so that you can test and learn and have your systems in place. To kind of use the, a travel analogy, if you will, like we all know this third-party cliff is coming, and now is the time you want to kind of turn your car into a plane. You want to build the wings, you want to build the engines now. While you're still on solid ground. you don't want to be doing that as you're heading off the cliff. And so smart people are doing it now, getting into it now, so that we take the next 6 to plus months to really build the expertise, the capabilities, and the comfort with doing this. Because the most important thing going through this is to maximize consistency, continuity, and conversions in a cost-effective way. And the best way to do that is to start now.
Couldn't agree more. I think, from a marketing perspective, we get requests every single day for content. People are just very hungry to understand, what does this change mean? How can we start to prepare? And I feel like there's no better way to wrap this up than leaving it at that. It's time to start talking to your partners and figuring out what your next move is, just really instilling that sense of urgency. And it's also a fantastic way to end the entire 5-part series that started all the way back in March. So I just want to give a huge thank you to our fantastic panel today. Big thanks to all of our live listeners and those of you listening later. But remember, you will be hearing from us a lot more on this. We are getting closer and closer to the death of that third-party cookie, and you've got to start getting ready ASAP. So we will have plenty of literature coming in the next few months and more info on next steps. Just want to give a final big shout out to Lena for all her awesome behind the scenes webinar mastery. And it's with great pleasure that I will say for the final time, my stolen signature sign off. And that's the way the third-party cookie crumbles. Thanks so much, everybody.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you.